My story is the Rush Edwards story. The Rush Edwards family history. The Rush Edwards family history did not start down this path. Though generations of the Rush Edwards descendants occupied this area now called Rushtown, the story of our ancestors did not begin here. The Rush story begins in Africa and the Virgin Islands. Most historians today believe between 9 and 11 million people were taken out of Africa by European slave traders and landed alive on the other side of the Atlantic. The ancestors of Abner and Amy Rush were brought to this country by the Middle Passage. This passage was very dangerous and miserable for African slaves. The Africans were separated by sexes, kept naked, packed closely together, and the men were chained for a long period of time. About 12% of those who embarked did not survive the voyage. Abner and Amy Rush, though both born during the institution of slavery, were destined to meet. We are not certain as to when or how their paths chanced to cross, but they did cross, and the rest is history. Abner Rush is thought to have been born on or around November 21st, 1844, and died May 30th, 1904, at the age of 59. Amy Johnson Rush has been given the birth date of January 1st, 1838. She died January 11th, 1934, at the age of 96. Around the time of their births, cotton emerged as the South's major cash crop. Cotton quickly eclipsed tobacco, rice, and sugar in economic importance. By 1860, slave labor was producing over 2 billion pounds of cotton per year. You can only imagine what type of work our ancestors had to endure based on these facts. Abner Rush spent 21 years as a slave, and Amy Rush spent 27 years as a slave. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed Abner and Amy Rush in 1863. 3 years later, in 1866, Abner and Amy were married in holy matrimony. This time also marked the enactment of black codes, which were laws passed by southern states in 1865 and 1866 in the United States after the American Civil War, with the intent and the effect of restricting African Americans' freedom and of compelling them to work in a labor economy based on low wages or debt. Black codes were a part of a larger pattern of Southern whites to surpass the new freedom of emancipated African American slaves, the freedmen. Legend has it that Amy, short in stature but strikingly beautiful with dark skin and lovely hair, it is said that she would wash it in a nearby river. Unfortunately, there are no such mentions of the physical features of Abner Rush. Unconfirmed documentation reports that when Abner became a freed man, he was given a few acres and $5. Josephine Rush Timmons, grandmother Josephine, relayed that the first land he purchased was lost because of some legal technicalities which he did not fully understand. These technicalities were most likely related to the black codes. The black codes were particularly concerned with controlling movement and labor, as slavery had given way to a free labor system. Although freedmen had been emancipated, their lives were greatly restricted by the black codes. Even with this disappointment, Abner did not despair. He continued to scrimp and save pennies. He worked hard and was finally able to purchase a tract of land which became known as Rushtown. This land is located on Rushtown Road in Effingham, South Carolina. Effingham's current population is about 9,855 people. Abner Rush knew how the Lord had blessed him and his family, and he was indeed thankful. He, along with others, wanted to start a place of worship. With the help of J.L. Smith, a white minister, they started a bush shelter. Abner was one of the first deacons. Both Amy and Abner were dedicated church workers. Close by the bush shelter, which later became Mount Rona Baptist Church, was the Rush's cemetery. The cemetery's name was changed from Rush Cemetery to Mount Rona Church Cemetery in 1927. The Rush family believed in the old-time religion and held high moral standards for themselves and their children. The church that Abner Rush and others started in Effingham, South Carolina, is still in place today. We are happy to be hosting our 40th Rush Edwards family reunion at the church today. The church history is strong, and many of us had our beginnings at Mount Rona Baptist Church. Mount Rona Baptist Church has always been a driving force in the community and has produced many people of note. We thank God for the contributions of Mount Rona Baptist Church. Abner Rush was a devout Christian and passionate about education. With the church in place, Abner and Amy began to focus on their children's education. They had no formal education themselves, but they wanted to build a school for their children. With this in mind, they donated the land on which the Rush School was erected. This school enabled the Rush children and other children in the community to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. Because the Rush School was only a grammar school, the older Rush children were sent to Florence to further their education. Abner and Amy Rush made sure that the value of education were instilled in their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and generations to come. The next 4 slides are pictures of colored children in the 1950s and 60s in the Effingham, South Carolina areas. Many of their descendants became farmers. The main crop was tobacco. Abner and Amy Rush grandchild Mamie Edwards Graham followed in her grandparents' footsteps, and she farmed for many years as a free woman in a white man's world. She never allowed anyone to cheat her. She was a wizard when it came to keeping up with her cash. Farming in South Carolina was particularly hard during the Great Depression. The Great Depression had an enormous effect on the people of South Carolina. Many people were without jobs and unable to buy food. By June of 1932, cotton dropped to 51 cents a pound, the lowest it had been since 1894. The per capita income for South Carolinians dropped from $261 in 1929 to $151 in 1933. You can imagine the impact this had on our ancestors, but they still survived. Farming and planting their own gardens helped them to have food in the winter months. Arthur Edwards, a grandchild of Amy and Abner Rush, was also a farmer. This is Arthur Edwards' home in Rushtown. We spent many days on this porch resting when on a lunch break from the tobacco fields. His wife, Ida Mae Edwards, will cook delicious food to make sure the workers were able to make it through each hot day. Arthur Edwards worked hard to make sure his family had what they needed. Abner and Amy are both buried in the Rush Cemetery on Friendfield Road, adjacent to Mount Rona Baptist Church in Effingham, South Carolina. Many other ancestors are also located in this cemetery. Abner and Amy had 9 children. Abner and Amy Rush's children were 1. Abner Rush, who never married and there is no photo available. Mamie Rush, who died at the age of 11 and there is no photo available. 3. Beulah Rush, married Amos Shield, and they had no children. Another one of Abner and Amy Rush's children was Annie Rush, who married James Franks, and they had 6 children. Jerome, Wessie married Basil McAllister, Henry, Sophia, Everlina, and Jessie. Annie Rush and James Frank's daughter Wessie married Basil McAllister, and they had 2 children. 1. Armstrong McAllister and Annie McAllister. John W. Rush married Della Cummings, and they adopted 1 son, Ernest Rush, and we have no photo of Ernest at this time. Laura Rush married John McLeod. They became the parent of 1 daughter, Annie Jo, and adopted 1 son, Jesse. Mary Jane Rush married John Edwards. They became the parent of 8 children. Maxie Edwards, Mamie Edwards Graham, Bessie Edwards Jordan Morton, Annie Jo Edwards Myers, Abner Edwards, Arthur Edwards, Pearl Edwards, who died in a fire at the tender age of 13, and John C. Edwards, called Botch. The story of Bright and Julia Edwards is just as bright as the Rush story. Bright Edwards was born in 1842, and he became a landowner and farmer. When Bright Edward was born, there were many free African Americans by this time. However, they had very few legal protections. Julia Deese was born in 1858. Her occupation was farmer and housewife. She worked diligently with Bright to provide the best for their 8 children. When Julia came into the world, many things were happening. The Civil War had ended when she was 3 years old, and 4 million slaves had been set free. They were married in 1872 and had 8 children. During Bright and Julia Edwards' era, many free slaves began to leave the South. Many of the Rush and Edwards ancestors migrated north, but Bright and Julia Deese remained in the South and carved out a path for themselves by being strict and law-abiding citizens of the Friendfield community. These pioneer farmers were never too busy to enforce prayer and the seeking of the kingdom of heaven. Mount Rona Baptist Church was the family's church. They remained with the church unless one was removed through marriage or relocation. The family worked hard to ensure stability as well as ability. Even though it was difficult for blacks to attend school during these years, Bright and Julia Edwards managed to get their children educated well enough to learn reading, writing, and basic math skills. These great forerunners have left a legacy which supersedes silver and gold. The land provided Bright and Julia Deese with food and with shelter. The legacy that they left is the legacy of God's promise. God has promised that He will be our refuge, our strength, and our light. This family can attest to that fact that the promises are true. God has truly been a refuge of our strength and our light. Bright and Julia Deese Edwards were strong soldiers of the cross. They fought vigorously until their end. We who linger here must work to provide ourselves of their triumph. God has called all the children of Bright and Julia home. Those grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all generations to follow are bound to continue the triumph of faith through love and care for each other. Bright and Julia Edwards has 8 children. Johnny Edwards, who married Mary Jane Rush, Abner and Amy Rushchild. Arthur Edwards, who married Maybelle McNeil. Arthur Edwards and Maybelle had 3 children: Esther Edwards, Clarence Edwards, Henry Edwards. Bright and Julia's other child is Hezekiah Edwards, who had 12 children: Retha, Maggie, Maybelle, James, Helen McAllister, Johnny Edwards, Herbert Edwards, Thelma Peebles, Mac Edwards, Willie Edwards, Mary Eliza Edwards, and Bernice K. Edwards. Bright and Julia's next child is Estelle Edwards, who married Alex G. Gibbs, and they had 6 children. Estelle's 6 children were John Gibbs, Moses Gibbs, Alex Coote Gibbs, Rosalie Gibbs, Helen Gibbs, Bessie, and Sade Gibbs. Another one of Bright and Julia Edwards' children was Dora Edwards. Dora married Charlie Timmons, and they had 2 children. Dora and Charlie Timmons' children were Cliffy Timmons and Mary Timmons. Another child of Bright and Julia Edwards was Benny Edwards, who married Rosa Williamson and Daisy Kirk. He had 4 children. He also served in World War II. Benny Edwards' children were Peggy Edwards, Catherine Edwards Ford, Dorothy Edwards Dupree, and Leroy Edwards. One more child of Bright and Julia Edwards was Tisha Edwards, who married George Eady, and they had 6 children: Eva Mae Eady, Kathleen Eady, Julia Eady Kane, Elijah Eady, Hennard Eady, and Edward Eady. Hattie Edward, another child of Bright and Julia Edwards' clan, married Brunson Timmons, and they had 11 children. Hattie Edwards' children are George Timmons, Loren Timmons, Annie Lou Timmons, Alibis Timmons, Robert Timmons, Levy Timmons, Shannon Timmons, Alcis Timmons, Daisy Timmons, Hessie Timmons, Boyd Timmons Jr., and Jasper Timmons. The legacy of Josephine Rush and Reverend Moses Timmons, they had 3 children: Emma Timmons, Morgan Timmons, and Sarah T. McAllister. The following are pictures of the descendants of Josephine Rush and Reverend Moses Timmons.